I'm Agnieszka Niemark, and this is the Boyce Thompson Institute Centennial Oral History Project. Today, my interviewee is Luke Colavito, who worked as Senior Research Specialist at the Institute until 1990. And we are at Luke's home in Ithaca, upstate New York. It's December 8, 2022. Luke, first of all, thank you so much for taking part in this project.
Okay. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I would like to begin with your education and everything that happened in your early work that basically brought you to BTI in 1963. And I would like to mention that you started to work at the Institute in 1963 as research assistant. And a few years later, your wife, Greta Colavito, also got a job at the Institute, and we will be discussing her experiences as well. So let's start with your education and early work experiences.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was born in New York City and raised in the Bronx. Went to public schools. Went to a very fine high school, DeWitt Clinton High School, which has a wonderful history of scientists and theater people. It was a bus ride away for me. So I didn't go to my local high school, which was maybe 2 blocks away, but it was a specialty school. And New York had a policy that you could attend any policy high school in the city. I could have gone way down into Manhattan or Brooklyn if I wanted to. My school was a specialty school because it was an all-boys school. It is now not a specialty school anymore. I graduated high school and, went to City College. City College was a free school at that time. You only had to pay for your books and for joining the student union. That was about it. But it required traveling on a bus and then a subway to get there every day. So we were all commuters. Nobody lived at the college. So this is 1954 that I started. And I started as an engineer, but didn't quite like it and switched over to my second love. Well, actually, it was my first love, as biology. And I went into the biology program and majored in quite a bit of field work, which was at that time starting to be known as ecology. And I loved the field work. The professors took us on field trips all over the city. And I'd lived in the city up to that point, and I had never been to many of the locations that they took us. They did take us once in a while to places that I had been to, like the shore of Long Island, over at what's called Orchard Beach on Long Island Sound. And we worked on tide pools in that area. And the geology classes also took us there because of the bedrock in that area showing what's called diastrophism. There were all kinds of intrusions in the rocks, almost like what's happening in Hawaii now. While I was, I had graduated and I had taken a deferment to stay in school so I wouldn't be drafted. There was a draft. And because I took that deferment, I was up for the draft as soon as I graduated. So I looked into joining the National Guard, and there was a National Guard post not too far away from where I lived. It's called the Kingsbridge Armory, and it was a transportation unit. Its job was to ferry other National Guard units to various locations for their training. And I was sent to Fort Dix for my basic training. That was, 8 weeks. When I graduated that, I was sent to the Armor School in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And yes, we did visit Fort Knox where the gold was. And apparently you're not allowed anywhere near the place. And we were a group of trainees and walking up to the front door, and a loudspeaker said, "Please step away." And so we didn't see the gold. But I did receive training in taking care of all kinds of mechanical transportation, from jeeps, trucks, and armored vehicles. We did get to work on the tanks that were being used at that time. But almost everything used the same engine except for the tanks. And believe it or not, I got a diploma to show that I had graduated the armor school. And when I left, I began looking for work in my field, biology. And I really didn't have any connections at that time. But I went up to the New York State Employment Agency in White Plains, New York, and they were kind of unsure about how to find a job for me. And I suggested, why don't you call the New York Botanical Gardens? And they certainly did, and got in contact with a research scientist there. His name was Richard Klein. And he said, no, he didn't have any work for anyone, but he knew someone who did. And that was Walter Telecki. Now, I've skipped a little bit, I can see. My very first job was with the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, who had a field station in Westchester, up near Ossining, actually. And I worked there for about 3 months working on human tissue cells that came from Helen Lax. We only knew it as HeLa cells, Hela. And I never knew the person that they came from. These cancer cells were maintained in special solutions and had to be transferred periodically and refreshed. And then tests were run on these individual cells looking for any agents that would help cure cancer. And I think the project was sponsored by Pfizer. And we did find one item that seemed very promising. And at that time, I left along with the director to a different institute. The director had gotten a project to do research in the Antarctic. Well, the director of the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens didn't see that was anything that the gardens should do. They had a big argument. He was locked out. And he quickly found a job with Columbia University. And at their field station on the Palisades overlooking the Hudson River in New York. And when he was locked out, he literally could not get his equipment, his books. And he called me up and said, would I bring them over? And I did. And he said, why don't you stay here? And I did. So I had a job at Columbia University and was involved in this Antarctic research.
Look, so would you like to mention here that Lemont Observatory was actually the place where you met Greta? Could you tell us?
That's right. I had she had started work there, I think, maybe a year before I got there, and we shared with her group, which was meteorology, a building that used to be a swimming pool for an estate. We were on an estate that was given to Columbia by a man called Lemont, a financier, and we were inside a converted building that the pool was covered over with a floor, and the dressing room was where Greta worked. But it was large. It was a couple of rooms with a meteorologist group, and she actually worked as a secretary and all around helper. She did some work detailing maps. Her background was interesting. She came from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she had gone to the University of Michigan and had a master's in piano performance. She didn't see that as her life. So a friend of hers who had moved to the New York area and had married one of the scientists at Lamont said to Greta, "Come on down. We'll get you a job through my husband." And that's what happened. So we met when I came back from one of my side trips. That the director, that Dr. Paul Burkholder, and he was a member of the Academy of Sciences. And he kept encouraging me to become a bacteriologist. I didn't see it. And as I said, we terminated at that time because I was going to get married, so I was out of a job.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were both at Lamont Observatory. You got happily married with Greta.
Right.
How come you heard about the Boyce-Thompson Institute? How this job?
Okay. Well, I had lost my job at Lamont, and I went back to that agency in White Plains. Yeah, and I had told that part of the story. They contacted the New York Botanic Gardens, and they suggested this place called Boyce-Thompson Institute. I had never heard of it. It's on Broadway, just in the northern part of Yonkers, on Broadway. And that's the same Broadway from the bottom of Manhattan up to Albany. And we were right on that street. And I worked for Walter Tulecki. He's the one that interviewed me. He was a specialist in sort of a new part of science, plant tissue culture. So we had a separate room from our office combination laboratory, and that room is where all the cell lines were. And my job was to maintain the cell lines and perform whatever experiments were needed, calling for these different plant tissue cultures. Yeah.
So I see your first assignment at BTI was linked to cell tissue cultures.
Again, cell tissue culture.
And that was experience that you gained earlier at Brooklyn Botanical Garden.
Right.
But you mainly work or join the team of environmental researchers at BTI in the years following after your work with Dr. Tulecki.
Right.
If you would like, tell us first about this first assignment and ginkgo tree research that you mentioned to me that you did with Dr. Tulecki, and then we will move to the environmental biology studies.
Okay. Well, we had different lines, of course, of plant tissue culture that had been started up before I got there. And one of the tissue cultures was of the ginkgo tree. Now, the ginkgo tree has two sexes, the male, female, and one was green. I'm trying to think. The female was green tissue. It had photosynthetic abilities. And the other one was from the pollen. And that was a sort of a white tissue culture. And they were kept separate. And we did work on the two lines. Well, Walt wanted to, I guess, start up some new tissue from the ginkgo, and he had gone out in the spring and collected the leaves and the stamens, and he put them on top of the area in which we kept all these tubes of tissue cultures. And one day I discovered that they were what we found out later were leaf rollers, caterpillars inside the test tubes. Don't know how they got in there. They're minuscule, I guess, when they hatch. And they were in there. He saw this as something really unique because the ginkgo tree dates back to the Jurassic periods, and it outlived all its predators. There was nothing known in the literature that ate a ginkgo leaf. And here is something eating a ginkgo leaf. And it was really an interesting research project. And he did get a wonderful paper out of it. And he put my name on it, which was very nice of him. It was his accident that did it, but I maintained the cultures.
So it was an interesting first experience,
It
right?
was.
An interesting
It was.
start.
Right.
And you told me, look, that Dr. Tulecki left after 2 years of this
Right,
kind of cooperation
yeah.
that you have with him.
Well, I had a unique relationship with Walt in that we shared an office. Our desks were facing each other, and it was in a laboratory, so we had equipment on top of tables and things. But we would talk a lot, and he was a very progressive man, almost a little too progressive for the director. The director really didn't care for Walt's, his politics, I guess. And I have to admit, Walt turned me into a radical. He was terrific. And he decided to leave, I think was under pressure. And when he announced it to me, it was a shock. And I went out into the hall and I bumped into Leonard Weinstein, Dr. Leonard Weinstein. I knew him from playing volleyball at lunchtime. That was one of the wonderful things we did at the Institute. Leonard was the head of a project called, at that time, the Fluoride Project. And I said, Len, Walt's leaving. And he said, oh, well, come work with us. So that's how you get a job. In fact, I found most of all the wonderful things that happened to me happened in that hallway. Overhearing conversations and finding places to live and job opportunities for other people like Greta. And I had overheard the librarian say that she needed an assistant. I was walking past her at that time, Joan DeFato, and I said, whoa, my wife, I think, would be interested in that. And she was. So Greta did start working there part-time in the library and part-time in the business office. And she actually got to work as a receptionist with a telephone system. What was that when you put the
Switchboard.
switchboard? There it is. It's a switchboard, the old-fashioned switchboard. And but her job started to be more of the library. And when the Institute was about to move, the librarian did not want to go there. Her name at that time was Susie Broke. She didn't want to go up to Ithaca. As many of the people at the Institute, they elected not to travel with it. Some of them had come up to Ithaca to look at the prospects. And when they hit Richford and all the snow, this was March, some of them literally turned around and went home. They're not used to that kind of thing.
So look, we will talk about the move and about Greta experiences in a moment.
All right.
If I could, I just wanted to go back to establish basically your collaboration with the environmental program.
Right.
So as you said, it wasn't really a conscious choice at the moment. It was more a coincidence that Dr. Weinstein said,
right.
join our team.
That's right. I barely knew about the group.
But I guess you had a background that helped you to work with this team.
Right. It's just the hands-on type research.
If we could just start by talking about the fluoride project, because as you told me earlier, it was one of the important research projects when it comes to environmental studies. I just wanted to mention here that the BTI work on some environmental issues in the early years. The institute was established in 24, and already in 1928 they work on sulfur dioxide effects on plants and also on sodium and other chemicals. I just wanted to ask you why fluoride was important, why this research was selected by the Institute. If you could talk a little bit about the choices of the projects.
Well, the project was financed by a consortium of manufacturers of aluminum. And one of the byproducts of making aluminum was fluoride. And it's a very strong poison. And I know it's in the toothpaste, and there's a lot of people who are still against that, putting fluoride in your system. They may have a point. I don't know. But I know my kids had very good teeth because of the fluoride in the toothpaste. And they sponsored the research, the effects of fluoride on, now we're talking intact plants. But there was a little bit of a holdover in that one of the research assistants was going to, I think it was Columbia, and this was Peter Pruess, and he wanted to use a tissue culture of acacia. Acacia was one of the trees that the fluoride unit used as an indicator of how damaging fluoride is. And I stayed in the laboratory that Walt and I had shared for one more year. And Peter and I worked together. And Peter eventually got his PhD later on. And he moved to Israel. But we became very good friends with Peter.
And look, in general, if you could talk a little bit more about your work to explain to us how it was done, if it was partly laboratory work and partly working in the fields, because the Boyce Thompson Institute had a lot of properties around the institute that could be used for research. If you could just explain this research on fluoride or later on ozone, how it was done, hands-on,
Right.
I mean.
Well, so as I said, my first supervisor was Leonard. And I was in his lab with, Jill Goldman, another lab assistant. Mostly we worked on intact plant material growing in greenhouses and then put into what we call chambers, the air flowing through it, and you would inject different amounts of fluoride in this case. Eventually, we transferred over into other pollutants, and that's when the project really expanded. And I actually shifted from working for Leonard and working for Dr. J. Jacobson. And again, this was a unique thing. I think I was the only laboratory assistant that shared an office with a supervisor. And we had the desk facing again each other, Jay and I. And Jay was also from the Bronx, different part of the Bronx. We had a lot in common. And he was only a few years older than I was, but we had a wonderful relationship. And there were two other people working for Jay, Larry Heller and Elaine Cole. And they're both my lifelong friends. We came here this past summer, and we all had a wonderful party. Actually, on our 60th anniversary, wedding anniversary, happened to be on that day.
Yeah. So it seems to me, look, that the environmental team was quite strong in the 60s and 70s, and gradually more and more air pollutants were added to the research studies that you were conducting in these years. Could you tell me a little bit about also the selections of the new research? Was that related to the air quality in Yonkers, the additional new studies of sulfur dioxide or nitrogen dioxide, and later on acid rain and ozone? or did the institute follow the scientific research of different institutions and scientific trends and was expanding its research? How would you explain, the new choices?
Well, it was all the above. And yeah, the area was prone to high levels of ozone, which drifted up from New York City whenever the wind was from the southwest. This was principally during the early spring and into the summer. Now, New York City shared this burden of ozone from starting, I would say, from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., on up into Jersey, and then New York, Yonkers, and it kept going. And it went up to Boston. And as we found out later, it went up into New England, too. One of the last projects, maybe we'll get to it later, was in Acadia National Park. And that's the point at which I retired. But that would end this this whole thing.
But just for people to understand, were the level of air quality in Yonkers gradually becoming a concern, like it was making the studies more difficult in the 60s and 70s?
Right. Well, our work on ozone was used to really set standards that are set by the government, and they were. We exposed many different species of plants to ozone to get the relationship to levels. And I actually had a tobacco section outdoors, which I rated each week. Tobacco was being grown in Connecticut at that time for the cigar wrappers. And it could be grown there, but it was getting hurt by something. Well, it turned out to be ozone. And it became a wonderful indicator plant. From week to week, we would certainly monitor all ambient ozone levels, and I would see the effects on the plants. They were rated. I also did some work on pollen. And, I'm not quite sure why, but Jay Jacobson somehow was in contact with the New York office, and they wanted pollen to be identified. It was a lot of fun learning about pollen at that time.
And look, could you talk also about analytical methods, like when, for instance, the modular chambers were introduced? Was that during your time at the Institute?
Yes. As I said, we had indoor chambers. Eventually, we did have outdoor chambers. These were cylindrical, open-top chambers made of what's called phylon. It's a sort of a plastic infused with other materials. In fact, that came to be the material that we used here in Ithaca when we came up with a lot of our open chamber work. We also worked with outdoor closed chambers, too. They were quite large.
What would be the difference when it comes to methods of research?
Well, the ones with the closed ones, they look like miniature greenhouses, but a good-sized greenhouse. Those were used for acid rain studies. Again, a consortium of the utilities that produce electricity, they were being accused of causing acid rain. And what would be the effects of this? So you had to have specialists who could produce a mist that was like a rain event. So we had people become specialists. That was one of the things about being a research assistant. You had to change, your hats many times. And so Terry Lauver became our specialist, and I think David Silverman too, down in Yonkers.
So in the closed chambers, you basically created special conditions, right, for analyzing.
Environment, yes. we were not able to prove any damage on our studies on our vegetation, but it turned out that the buffering capacity of the soil neutralizes it. So the damage from acid rain really came about in areas that had low buffering capacity, and that was the Adirondacks. There really was no buffering, so it did affect them, and it caused the ponds and lakes become more acidic. The results did show that they had to curtail this amount of producing so much acid rain. And it did work. I think things are much better now. I don't hear anything about acid rain anymore.
Yeah. So the BTI, when based still in Yonkers, had quite good laboratory facilities. And what I understood from reading historical accounts is that a substantial progress was made around 1967 in development of an environmental health laboratory. Would you remember anything about that, Luke? Did you work with this kind of lab, or was that the work of somebody, of other people?
Well, I think that's a title given to the whole group. There were, I think, 5 major scientists, and the staff, I added it up, but at times it could be as high as 15 laboratory assistants plus maybe postdocs and visiting scientists. We had visiting scientists. It was quite an endeavor. We had a whole upper floor wing to ourselves. When I first started at the Institute, I probably came in at an interesting time. The first and the last of the original scientists were still there, and they were environmental scientists. One was Hitchcock, believe it or not. His name was Alfred Hitchcock. And Zimmerman, I can't think of Zimmerman's first name right now. And I would hear Leonard mention Hitch and Zim, and I would see them in the halls running around. And there were a number of other scientists still from the original crew that started in 1924, and they basically were phased out. They retired while I was starting up with Leonard's project.
New generations.
Eventually, yeah. So I was there at a pivotal time. I haven't mentioned how friendly the Institute was, really, in terms of things to keep the staff happy. You know, they had Christmas parties. We had a book club. I actually was part of the staff of the book club that went out and bought the books. We would make them available to everybody at the Institute. These were either fiction and nonfiction, and then auction them off at a big book club. And I think Dr. McNew used to buy most of the books and then give them back to us.
Look, so that's wonderful. Let's transition to the question about life in Yonkers. It will be wonderful if you tell us about how you and Greta found a home near the Institute, and also things that you mentioned to me, the coffee breaks for junior staff and weekly lectures in the lunch hall. If you could talk about this kind of everyday life in Yonkers.
Right. We had a lunch hall that also doubled as a lunchroom. And we had a dedicated cook. It was a full-time job. And she cooked lunches for us. And that was every day at noon. That room was then changed. All tables were taken out and chairs put in for lectures. And we would attend at least one lecture a week, seminars. Sometimes there'd be outside scientists, sometimes inside scientists. It was really wonderful to hear these reports, basically. And I do remember that I would notice that Dr. McNew would kind of nap. And it always amazed me when the speaker stopped. The very first question came from Dr. McNew, and it was the best question that you could ask. So I guess he was just closing his eyes.
He was a brilliant man.
He was. I will say this, I do remember the very first time I showed up and Walt Tillecki decided to hire me. He took me in to see Dr. McNew, and Dr. McNew had to determine whether I should be hired. And so Walt had to say why he wanted me and to set a salary. And I thought it was very interesting. Okay, this is 1963. And Walt said, how about 5,000? And Dr. McNew said, no, 4,800. And that's what it was. And believe it or not, it was enough. Because down the line, again, in the hall, I overheard one of the people in charge of the grounds say that there were houses available. The Institute had bought up all the land around it because they felt that there was going to be encroachment. And so they bought up all the land, which included a golf course and a number of buildings, one of which was a mansion owned by, one of the local, we used to call them robber barons along the Hudson. And it was actually next door to the original home of Thompson, which is called Alder.
So we are talking basically just across the street, across Broadway
Literally
from
across
the Institute.
Street. He had the Institute built across the street from his home. And this was after he had traveled to Russia on behalf of the Red Cross. And he was always known as Colonel. I thought it was maybe the military, but it wasn't. It was in the Red Cross. And he liked to use the name Colonel, apparently. And but he saw the terrible situation in Russia after World War I. And so in 1924, he decided to fund the building of a research institute, but only for plant research. And the title was For Food and Fiber.
Yeah, I think it was poverty and starvation, after the First World War that he saw in Russia. That made him think that research on plants might be very important.
It might be very important, yeah. And he was right. He was right. I think the Institute now has dropped the title of Plant Research. They shortened it. They shortened the name, but it was always known as the Institute for Plant Research.
That's right, in the early years.
Right.
And
so anyway, I was getting at these...
the housing situation,
yeah,
of
the
the
houses,
staff and your
right.
own. That would be
Right.
great.
So these homes were available, and some of the senior staff went to some of the homes, and there was one home that nobody seemed to want. It was on the golf course, on the edge of the golf course, but it had been used to clean a lot of equipment, and they had a solvent that really ranked. It smelled terrible, and nobody wanted it. But it didn't bother us. And luckily, they did take the tank away, and we got this wonderful home. And I moved my family from Rockland County in March of 67, I guess. And I remember that in that March, I was only like about a 10-minute walk from the Institute, and I would cut across the grounds of the golf course, and it had snowed. And I really didn't know my way too well, and I fell in a sand trap up to my waist in snow. I thought, this is a funny place to die. But it was always a short walk to that was a wonder. I used my car to go to work.
So just for the record, I wanted to mention that BTI acquired the Hudson River Country Club, which included the golf club,
That's
in
right.
1966. So probably
Right.
your housing happened.
Right. And a few of the senior staff and junior staff moved into the country house. They lived in there.
Yes.
There's a few people. I think Alan Rennick may have lived there. I know David Silverman lived in there, and Vlado Mako was another one that lived in there. And we did have parties there. The book club had a party inside there.
Look, could you talk also a little bit about other activities that you were able to do just around the institute, like gardening or organizing picnic in Stanfordville? That also that was a farm in Dutchess County that the BTI acquired at some time in the 50s or 60s.
Right, right. The highlight I think of the year was the picnic up at the farm, not too far from Poughkeepsie, and it was in Staffordville, and it was a 2-hour drive up the Dagonic Parkway. It's a really lovely place. It had a converted farm building for people to stay from the Institute. And you could stay for a week or you could stay for a weekend. And we always made use of it. We actually eventually camped on the grounds too, because friends of ours on the project were campers, and we got into the habit. Greta was a great camper. Her parents camped in starting in the 30s and 40s, when no one camped. They'd be the only ones in the Michigan campgrounds.
So how would you describe the atmosphere in Yonkers when it comes to social life? You mentioned to me that in general it was a very collaborative atmosphere. Was that coming partly from the social activities done together, sports and other things? Also when it comes to work, you felt like it was a very friendly
atmosphere? We collaborated as scientists. I mean, if you needed help that was not available within your group, you went to another group, and they would take on the help, sometimes join in the project, and collaborate in publishing the literature, into the literature. It was very handy to have that. Services were set up. There was a really extensive workshop at the ground floor of the Institute. And any help we needed, we would go to the workers down there. They were a marvel. I had a little mini chamber made up out of lucite. I gave the directions. The man down there, his name was Bill Muriak, and it was for exposing tissue cultures. This was the acacia tissue cultures for Peter Proust, so that we could see the effects. And then there was an electron microscopy section, and lots of the tissues were looked at by the electron microscopist, and they would get their name on the paper. Everybody was collaborating, basically, and all these social things just helped to put us all together. Then we had Christmas parties. The Christmas party was actually held in the lobby first with songs, singing of carols, the entire staff, and then into Dr. McNew's office, which was enormous, and all the families would be there. So we got to meet all the families and their kids at that time. So it just was a wonderful atmosphere.
And it seems that there were not so many barriers between junior staff and senior staff and people working as part of the support staff.
Yeah, well, I was on great terms with people from the senior staff to the point of going out with them, traveling with them, and we shared our hobbies among each other. People where there were people who liked bird watching. There was a whole series of things that people shared, and friendships, which go on to this day.
Do you believe that the deterioration of the air quality in Yonkers over years was one of the factors for the Institute to look for the different location, or it was mostly, as others believe, the problem, with increasing property taxes and some other problems with the properties that BTI had in the
Yeah,
1970s?
as far as I remember, those were all the reasons. I mean, our work was getting more and more difficult to do because the air pollutants were very strong, getting stronger and stronger at that time. And I guess the Institute was also facing its infrastructure getting old, and they would have to invest a huge amount of money. So they were not sure it was worth doing. And I guess that's when they put out feelers as to a new location. And I think the first location was in Corvallis, and that's at Oregon. And that shocked us when we heard that. And as far as I know, Leonard Weinstein was responsible for contacting our state representative, Ottinger, to get some help from the state. And we did get help. They supported our move to the Cornell campus, built a new facility for us, and moved everybody up. So the move was unbelievable.
What was your personal reaction to this
Well, my
change
first
of
reaction was,
location?
I got to find a new job. I didn't want to move upstate.
Okay.
I
And
really-
after a first visit,
I
like
was just a homebody. My family, all my relatives are all down in New York. And to all of us, Ithaca, New York sounded really far away. I did explore possible new employment, and I did get hired by another organization. I think it was Union Carbide, and then I got a call from the man who hired me, and he said, there's something strange going on here. There's a freeze on hiring. And he said, I can't hire you. And as it turned out, they froze a whole division and closed it down.
so then you had no choice then.
Yeah, I had no choice. And it was a lucky move that I didn't get that job.
So the last 10 years, more or less 10 years of your work at BTI happened at Cornell in
Right.
Ithaca, when the Institute moved to Ithaca, upstate New York. Could you look about changes that happen when it comes to research and your work for the Institute? How your life changed in general?
Yeah, it was very different. We did have kind of the ability when we were down in Yonkers. We were outside quite a bit. Most of the other researchers, the junior staff, they really were stuck indoors. I didn't see too much that they worked outside, but we did have outside work. So there was a degree of what I would call freedom. But when we moved up here, it was a different story altogether. We had to build up our project, and through that, we got to really meet the community. We needed to go to all the different stores for equipment, and even with Cornell, we got to be very friendly with sources of materials from Cornell and how they could help us. And it just was such a different feeling. We would meet in the mornings, plan the day, and projects were ongoing. Somebody had to be out in those field plots, checking the equipment and seeing that everything was working right.
Could you tell us about the field plots, where they were located in Ithaca?
If you do know your way around Cornell, this was near McGowan Woods, right off 366, And it's only 5 minutes by car to get to it. And we had a whole couple of acres and a large it was a barn-like structure for all our equipment. And then we had a couple of what were converted mobile homes with our instruments, basically. And then we built up the chambers. As I said before, there were two types, open and closed. We planted lots of trees that were used for research. We had to learn that the weather is very different up here, that the frost came earlier, which it does not come anymore. We actually had a frost once that ruined an experiment on green beans. It came too early. It came in the end of August. It's unheard of to have such an early frost now.
And the air quality in Ithaca,
The
which
air
is
quality
very
was,
good in general.
of course, in terms of ozone, negligible. But there was a lot of ozone in the area, like the Corning area had quite a bit of pollution from automobiles, and then to the north, the Syracuse, Rochester area, they too had their pollution. But we were in good shape here. The only pollutant that would pop up once in a while was sulfur dioxide if the winds were northeast from Milliken power station, and that was a byproduct with sulfur dioxide. But the area was so clean that the trees are still festooned with lichens. Lichens are a good indicator of air pollutants, especially sulfur dioxide. So it was a pleasure to see beautiful lichens up here.
And you mentioned, look, that at some point you started also consultation work in collaboration with Robert Kohut. And that happened in Maine, in some national park in Maine. Was that still in the 80s or did...
Well, yeah, basically I came up and worked for Jay until I guess 2 years up here. And I was switched to Robert Kohut. And he was put in charge of what was called the NCLAN project. This was all the work that was being done out at the field sites. And that sort of segued into the work that was done at the end of my time at the Institute up to Acadia National Park. But as I said, the ozone had gone up the entire coast, and it was a concern to the people up at Acadia National Park, which is pretty far up Maine. And Bob Kohut ran a project where we moved our chambers, these big open-top chambers, just off the coast, basically. We could walk to the Atlantic Ocean on our lunch hour, the sand beach. And so we exposed the native vegetation, basically, up there to see the effects. I kind of finished my tenure at the Institute with this work. I think I had retired, and I still managed to go up there as a so-called consultant.
Yeah. Look, and can you tell us a few words about the change when it comes to social life once the BTI moved to Ithaca? Because the environment changed quite a lot. Now the Institute was based in one building for research.
Right.
Where the social life went?
Well, when we first moved up here, basically, we banded together, basically. We didn't know anybody up here, so we all sort of kept to ourselves in a way, the junior staff and the senior staff. Leonard was a big help in inviting all of us over to his home for parties, and his wife Sylvia would make wonderful meals for us. And we used, well, where I live now in this area, there were 4 of us who worked at the Institute. Let me see, well, at least maybe 5. And we would get together too. So at first we were very insular. But because we did not have a lunchroom now, it was decided, well, Cornell had many lunchrooms or sources to get food. We wouldn't need one. And we kind of were very unhappy about that. But it turned out there were some wonderful places to go. And we, on our lunch hour, we had a full hour for lunch, and we went to what was then the Dairy Bar, which has changed quite a bit, but it was like a restaurant at one time. And we would go to other places on campus. This was mostly the junior staff. We were joined now by other people up here, Terry Lauver and Rich Raba. I'm going to leave out some people. I'm forgetting them. But we made new friends with people who were hired from the local population.
Look, if we could talk also about how Greta's work changed when the Institute moved to Ithaca.
Right.
I understand that she had to fill much bigger shoes because, first of all, the library had to be moved from Yonkers to the new building at Cornell. And as Susan Brock retired, it seems that Greta was responsible for this big mission. Can you talk about that and what happened later?
Sure. Greta was given the responsibility of moving up the library and putting it in place. Now, it was small. It wasn't as big as we had a huge library, 3 floors and of books. So books were selected to bring up. When we moved up here, Greta moved up ahead of me in August. I came up in October. And she placed all the books, arranged them all, and all the publications. And they also wanted her in the business office. And she was like among the first in that business office up here. And so she regulated that. Again, she was in charge of now the receptionist, and she was the receptionist occasionally. And then the managing director, Wellman, who came up with us, he retired, and the new man, Roy Young, needed an administrative secretary, and everybody suggested Greta. Well, Greta then moved up into the executive assistant realm, and she sort of took charge of all the things that an executive director had to do. She set up meetings in New York at the Cornell School, hotel, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Cornell Club.
Yeah, the Cornell Hotel.
Club.
Club.
Cornell Club,
Right.
that's right.
Which was a joy for me because I loved being down in New York. I used to go down and roam around the whole city, more than I ever did when I lived there. So Greta actually became very important to the Institute. She was awarded this Brooks Colavito Award, which was set up after, I guess, she retired. And she was the first recipient of it. And we were given a free trip anywhere in the U.S., and they gave us quite a bit of money so I could afford to live high in the hog down there. And we traveled all over the Southwest. It was one of the most wonderful things we did together. And I think we were basically retired maybe at that time. But the awards go on, and it's for, somebody who did something special for the Institute. And Greta certainly did, and so did Betty Brooks, whose name is on there. Yeah. Right.
Okay, look, so it seems to me that you were both quite satisfied with your work and life after the move to
Oh,
Ithaca and
it was the
Cornell.
best thing that ever happened to us. Yeah. When I brought my kids up, I thought they would not be happy, but they loved it up here. I took them to Buttermilk Falls, and they couldn't believe how beautiful the area was. And no, they took to it very well. My daughter went to school nearby, DeWitt School. My son went directly to high school. And when he graduated high school, they both went to Binghamton, SUNY Binghamton. And my son majored in economics. When he graduated, he wanted to go in the Peace Corps. And when they saw on his resume that he could drive a tractor, because he had a summer job with us at the field flats, and they wanted him immediately, and it got him into going for a PhD eventually and work in Nepal, where he is at this moment that I'm talking. He's in Nepal, but he lives in Ithaca.
So it looks like in your case, some mechanical skills or engineering skill could help you get a
Again,
job.
mechanical skills came in very handy.
Handy.
That's right.
Okay, we'll have to stop here. Look, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.